Okay. I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Okay, so it looks like most people are interested in learning about different adaptation strategies that have been tested and are available. Then people are interested in learning about the process of adaptation planning, some stakeholder engagement, financial management, and data. Great. Now I'm going to pass it over to Kelly Milanowski at the Coastal Conservancy, who's going to give a brief introduction to sea level rise adaptation planning.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm just going to go through a couple of slides to do a brief overview of kind of why we're doing this webinar and why we're all planning for sea level rise. So as you know, sea level rise is happening around the state. We can already see its effects. Acting now to plan for sea level rise impacts and adaptation efforts will not only help us to avoid the higher cost of adaptation later, but will also help us to maintain things like public access and to increase the resilience of our natural systems and communities throughout a changing climate. Impacts we will experience from sea level rise and that some are experiencing now include flooding due to higher water levels, whether that's permanent or temporary inundation, more extreme storm surge, and exacerbated erosion. Some of the flooding will be temporary, other times permanent. These impacts will affect buildings, beaches, communities, public access, but also our systems and networks like transportation infrastructure, which can be disrupted or cut off due to sea level rise impacts and flooding.
Looks like we're still on the... There we go.
Oh, you guys missed my fun cartoon slide. I'll give you a sec before I advance. All right, so this is just one of the cycles for vulnerability assessments. I'm sure all of you have seen these. There's different iterations, and this one is just the state of California's version. So just to go through the process, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, the first kind of gray circles from 1 to 5 are kind of defining the vulnerability of each asset. So defining the exposure, you know, when and where and how are these assets getting wet, its sensitivity, potential impacts, adaptive capacity, so how well can this asset withstand impacts or be altered to withstand impacts, and then the risk and onset to determine each asset's vulnerability. So assets can be anything from hospitals to wastewater treatment plants to wetlands to a community or a neighborhood. This kind of phase from 1 to 5 seems to be where most folks are in now. The following step is kind of prioritizing needs. So which impacts are the ones that we should address first? And in my experience so far, it seems like this is where people are kind of stuck. Then identifying adaptation strategies, which it looks like a lot of folks are interested in, evaluating and prioritizing strategies, and then phasing and implementing. So I think it's really this, you know, the step 6 to 9 that we need to get to. So who is doing this work? This work is done and funded by many different agencies and public entities. You know, sometimes it's cities. It could be a public works department at a city or county, planning, or another department like the Office of Sustainability. Sometimes, yeah, it's the county. Sometimes communities start this work on their own. Or vulnerability assessments can also be done by folks like resource agencies focused on our natural resources, or transportation agencies like Caltrans looking specifically at transportation assets. So these are all at varying scales and depths with varying focus areas. And just as who leads this effort from place to place varies, so do the outcomes. Some assessments are broad and identify areas in which a more detailed assessment should be conducted. Some assessments are more specific but do not include adaptation strategies. Some include adaptation strategies, but they aren't specific and need additional feasibility assessments to implement. Other assessments generate value added, such as recommendations on adaptation strategies focused on governance and policies that can be replicated elsewhere. Other adaptation reports include legal memos and business case studies that can inform other efforts. So we're going to go through another quick poll. So from these steps, from 1 to 5 is where I thought most folks were at, but we'll see. So what steps of the cycle have you worked on? Steps 1 through 5, step 6, step 7, step 8, or step 9? We'll give you about 20 seconds to answer this poll, and then we'll show the results. right, so we snuck a different poll on you by accident, but we'll do this poll first, and then we'll go back to the one I mentioned. This poll we were going to save for the end, so we kind of revealed the big ending of this webinar. But what key lessons learned resonate with you? It looks like folks are most interested in being adaptive and building in flexibility, and then partnerships and stakeholder engagement. So we're going to really dive into these lessons learned with our 3 partners. But right before we do that, we're going to do one more poll about the adaptation planning process. All right, looks like we're having trouble with that poll, so we might be able to do it at the end. But good to know what you guys are interested in learning about in terms of lessons learned. All right, so this slide is just to kind of show you how much work is being done all over the state. So you can see there's different keys here for the Conservancy, Coastal Commission, Ocean Protection Council work, and then other efforts. As you can see, there are many assessments happening all over the state of varying degrees. Since it seems most of us might still be in the planning phase, we might have to get that pull back up later to confirm. These assessments vary from place to place. The Conservancy thought it important to pull partners together today so that we can share these lessons learned, since it seems a lot of us are in the planning phase. And Sea Grant and Coastal Commission and others have also been doing similar lessons learned, kind of information sharing, webinars and events. And so we decided to do our own today, and we're happy to have all you here with us. The more that we're learning, the better our assessments, the better the assessments we can provide for our communities, and the closer we can get to implementing adaptive strategies. So thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. We're going to jump into our first presenter from San Mateo County, Hilary Papendick, and she's going to talk about her experience working in San Mateo County and some of the lessons learned she's heard. We'll then have 2 panelists following after Hilary, and then Hilary Papendick, and then we'll give it back to Hilary Waleka here at the Coastal Conservancy to kind of wrap things up for us. So Hilary Papendick, take it away.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. Everyone see my screen? So, as Kelly mentioned, today we'll be talking about San Mateo County Sea Level Rise Planning Effort, which has begun with a development of a vulnerability assessment for both the Bay and the coast of San Mateo County. We are very thankful for the Coastal Conservancy for funding this project. First, a little context. Located just south of San Francisco, San Mateo County is a peninsula that is bordered by the San Francisco Bay on the east and the Pacific Ocean on the west. The county has 20 cities, about 750,000 people.
Hey, Hilary, we can't hear you very well. Is there a way to get your audio to work better?
Is that better?
No.
Oh, is that better?
Yep, that's better.
Okay. Sorry about that. Should I start from the beginning?
That'd be great.
So, as Kelly mentioned, I'll be talking about San Mateo County's sea level rise planning efforts, which has begun with the development of a vulnerability assessment for both the Bay and the coast side of the county. We are very thankful for the Coastal Conservancy for funding this project. First, a little context. Located just south of San Francisco, San Mateo County is a peninsula that is bordered by the San Francisco Bay on the east and the Pacific Ocean on the west. The county has 20 cities, about 750,000 people, and includes the San Francisco Airport, as well as a booming tech and biotech industry with Facebook, Genentech, Oracle, Visa, and IBM located in the county and in areas that could be affected by sea level rise. On the coast side, we have Highway 1, which draws tourists from around the world. So our sea level rise initiative is called Sea Change SMC. Our process includes first assessing risks, and then next our planning phase, and finally implementation of projects. We are currently in the assessing phase and should have the public draft of our vulnerability assessment available for review by early January. However, it's worth noting that throughout the county, a number of cities and organizations are already implementing projects and updating plans to address sea level rise. We will work on developing a coordinated countywide sea level rise strategy after our vulnerability assessment is complete. Here's an overview of our vulnerability assessment steps. It's included a number of different steps from gathering data, developing exposure maps and an inventory of assets exposed to sea level rise, to the analysis of vulnerability and risk. We've worked with Arcadis Consulting and AECOM to complete the study. Our study area includes the entire bay side of the county and the coast side from the north part to Half Moon Bay. We will be completing the south coast portion of the county after we complete our current vulnerability assessment effort. A key tenet of our project has been to facilitate stakeholder and public participation in the development of our vulnerability assessment. We've engaged stakeholders in the public in a number of different ways. We have a technical working group consisting of asset managers and technical city staff. We have a policy advisory group, which includes high-level staff from cities and agencies and organizations, as well as a community task force, which consists of community group representatives and members of the public. Here are a few of our draft products from our report. This is an exposure map that shows all of the assets that we inventoried in the north part of the bay shore. And this is really intended to show where there are high concentrations of assets at risk. And as part of the study, we completed a detailed assessment on 30 different assets, which, as Kelly mentioned, an asset is a wastewater treatment plant, coastal trail, a hospital, our public transit stations. And these case studies are meant to be representative of the different types of assets in the county and to provide a template to further evaluate vulnerability. So before I get to lessons learned, I wanted to talk about where we are headed next. Throughout the project, we've been gathering information from cities and partners about how the county can best work together to take action on sea level rise. Based on this feedback, we plan to work with cities and other stakeholders on an adaptation plan framework, a model sea level rise policy, consistent policy language, pilot projects, and continuing to build partnerships across sectors. So now I'll dive into some of our lessons learned. My first couple slides are about the people and partnerships that have helped make our project successful. I've found that having a political champion who is invested in the project has helped instrumentally in getting through roadblocks and also increasing city and stakeholder participation. In our case, we've had Supervisor Pine and Supervisor Horsley providing leadership on sea level rise in the county. In addition, having an internal project management team with department heads from a number of our different county departments has really helped us connect to the right people to answer questions and provide guidance throughout the project. It's also helped us steer clear of some politically sensitive items, which are bound to come up when you're talking about sea level rise and climate change. As I mentioned before, collaboration with cities and stakeholders has been a key part of this project. We found it is important to reach out and develop relationships with each level of government, at the staff level, with upper management, and elected officials. It's really important not to assume that one group is updating the other group. Also, I've found that people that I've met with in person have been much more responsive to future requests and then have seemed more engaged throughout the entire project. Also, it's important to remember who you're talking to and what their level of understanding is relating to sea level rise, and to really make sure that when you're meeting with people that you are tailoring your messages to the different audiences within your project stakeholder groups. So my next slide is about lessons learned around project management. With climate change projects, it's almost a given that something will change within the scope of the project. So be ready to change and manage and be flexible. So I'd also recommend framing the report at the very beginning of the project and as you go along. This will help make sure you have the finish line in mind as you work through all the different steps of your analysis. Also, people are busy and need reminders. For us, we're working with 20 different cities, and that means a lot of follow-ups. So we've had to learn not to take it personally when people don't respond, just pick up the phone and remind them. Another thing we've learned is that good data can be surprisingly hard to find, especially if you're working on a multi-jurisdictional project. Some things we have learned are to build in the time needed to find and check data for accuracy. But it's also important to avoid getting stuck on data gaps. Sometimes it's best to acknowledge that there are data gaps and move on. As we all know, climate modeling and sea level rise mapping is not perfect. So it's important to understand the limitations and communicate these to your stakeholders, but those limitations shouldn't be a reason to avoid making decisions and really moving forward through your process. And another thing that we found important is because data is constantly evolving, to develop systems that are easy to use and easy to update if your data needs to be changed. My final slide on lessons learned is about how complex the work of sea level rise and climate change is. We found that the impacts of sea level rise really affect a number of different but interrelated systems. For example, sea level rise maps show above ground flooding, but do not show all of the underground infrastructure, storm drains, wastewater treatment systems or aquifers that could be affected. So it's really important to recognize this complexity, take a systems approach where possible, but without getting overwhelmed and kind of paralyzed by it. That's all I have right now for my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions during the Q&A portion of the webinar.
Great, thanks, Hilary. As a reminder to everyone on the line, if you have questions for Hilary, please feel free to write them into the questions tab, and we'll be compiling those for the end discussion. So next we'll hear from Kelly Leo at the Nature Conservancy and their work in Monterey Bay. I'll switch over the screen to you, Kelly.
Sounds good. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. Yep, that sounds good.
Okay. As I get started here, can you see my screen? A big fluffy dog.
We can.
Okay. Excellent. There we go. That's what I want to be showing. So hey everybody, it's Kelly Leo. I'm the Coastal Project Director for the Nature Conservancy based in Santa Cruz, so calling in from our office here in downtown Santa Cruz today. And we received this Climate Ready grant about over 2 years ago already. Time flies when you're having fun. But from the State Coastal Conservancy to look at the economic impact of different coastal climate adaptation strategies for southern Monterey Bay. And I won't keep you in suspense. I'm going to cut straight to the chase. What we found was really exciting for us at the Nature Conservancy, and that was that at least in southern Monterey Bay, it's definitely possible to plan ahead and protect our communities using nature-based adaptation approaches or non-armoring approaches, but it's also the financially sound and responsible thing to do. But before I get into kind of the logistics of what we actually did in the study, I just wanted to rewind and explain why we chose to work in this area. It may sound that it's convenient because we're located here in Santa Cruz, but we work statewide, so we thought that this was an important place to work because the stretch of shoreline has one of the highest average erosion rates in all of California, and because of that, this was also the place where the first coastal regional sediment management plan was created. And then that led to the development of an erosion mitigation alternatives analysis that was put out in 2012. And then that looked at the cost and benefits of a suite of different options to address erosion in that area. And then subsequent to the erosion mitigation analysis was the development of bay-wide sea level rise projections and a vulnerability assessment that's just wrapping up now. So our effort tied in with all of these that came before it, and we actually worked with a lot of the folks on the project teams from a lot of those previous and ongoing studies. So we were really making sure that we were coordinating with what had come before. We had a lot of historical knowledge in that. And what we did was take essentially the erosion mitigation alternatives analysis, so looking at different adaptation solutions for the coastline, but we actually went to stakeholders to refine some of the adaptation approaches that we were going to look at and make sure that they were really realistic. And then we incorporated all of the sea level rise projections into that. So we thought about, all right, what do we do to the coastline but on sea level rise? And then we also, because we're the Nature Conservancy, we're really concerned with how you think about the value of our coastal habitats and the environment. And we all know that if you don't give a value to that, it's essentially zero. So we don't think that that's a realistic way to consider the economics of our coastal management. So we pushed really hard to figure out how to incorporate that into this project. So I just want to flash up this very large project team. So we had a great team that worked together for these 2 years, and it's a lot of people, but it was a lot of talented experts in the field, and because we had so much brain power in the project, we were really able to kind of push the boundaries in terms of our methodological conversations. And you might think it's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, but it was actually a really fun project and a bit of a brain teaser at times, but it was a great group of people to work with. So the first thing that we did when we got the funding was to think about stakeholder engagement. So we held a workshop and went and invited decision makers and folks that are, have interest in that southern Monterey Bay area, and we asked them to help us select the strategies that are most useful for us to model. So we used some of the ones that were included in the erosion mitigation analysis report analysis, I guess, but we went above and beyond that, and we had this great workshop, and we got nearly all the way there. But the way we were doing the study, we had divided the coastline into 4 reaches based on similar coastal characteristics. So we're doing a couple different adaptation strategies, or analyzing a couple adaptation strategies for each of those 4 reaches. And our workshop got us 3/4 of the way there, but not everybody that we wanted to showed up because we didn't have long-standing relationships in the area. So we actually took the workshop on the road and had a bit of a roadshow and went to different municipalities and partners to help identify those strategies until we felt like we had the right set that were really going to be the most useful for stakeholders in the area. So once we had that, we passed all that over to the coastal geomorphologists and engineers, and they did the physical modeling. So they looked at what would happen to the shoreline and coastal assets and infrastructure if we were to implement each of these different selected adaptation strategies given sea level rise. And then, like I said, we wanted to think about how to consider the value of our ecosystems. So what we did was to create a relative ranking system and assign relative values to each stretch of the coast that we were studying, because we know that even in a small study area of southern Monterey Bay, beach habitat quality is still pretty variable across that study area. So for example, what you're looking at here, the beach quality and habitat quality here might be very different from beach quality and habitat quality here, where we've invested a lot of resources in the health of our coastal habitats. So, so then we passed all of that information over to our economists, and we had a team of 4 different economists who helped us look at the economic impact of these management decisions, again, under future sea level rise scenarios. And now that we're finished with the report, we're actually working to integrate all of this information into a user-friendly app so that you don't have to read the 80-something page report with hundreds of pages of appendices if you don't really want to. You can actually ultimately come here and interact with some of the data in a very visual way. So this is a snapshot from an app that we put together for Ventura County for a project that we've done, a similar project that we'd completed the year before. And this was just rolled out, I think, like last week or the week before, so hot off the presses. But we're expecting that the Monterey version of this will be ready in probably February or early March of next year. So we'll definitely have a webinar and let you know when that happens. But I just wanted to flash up an example of some of these different adaptation strategies that we're talking about, just to give you a little bit more context. So one of I'm going to do 2 opposite ends of the spectrum, but what you're looking at here is essentially building a revetment, holding the line, putting that gray infrastructure in and protecting what's in place. And then here's an example of a non-armoring approach, which is the other opposite end of the extreme, and we looked at things in the middle as well, like elevating infrastructure and managed retreat and rolling easements, but this is probably the opposite end of that, which is just allowing erosion and even managing retreat, like removing that structure and letting the sea reclaim that beach area and that habitat. And then for each of these different adaptation strategies that we looked at, we have geospatial results. So at the top there, that top box, that's existing conditions, and you're looking at the yellow line is the beach, the tiny little brown line is the dune, the red line is storm erosion, and then the pink is wave runoff. And then everything below that, you're looking at the 3 different strategies that are depicted here for the Del Monte area, which is the city of Monterey. And we looked at allowing erosion, beach nourishment with building a groin, and then building a revetment. And I think the main takeaway here is if you compare these on the right-hand side, when you get down to the bottom and you look at the hold the line, where you build the revetment, there's no yellow left, there's no beach left. So this is exactly what we were trying to look at when we do these strategies. How does the shoreline actually change, and then what does that mean for us economically and environmentally? So like I mentioned before, we had designed that relative ranking system to assign those relative values to each stretch of the coast that we were studying. And this part is pretty tricky. So assigning value to coastal habitats, people generally have avoided it. There's no consensus on how to do it. And it's quantifying ecosystem services is filled with value judgments. It's open studies up to criticism. So we didn't actually come out right and assign a value. We assigned a relative value for this particular area so that we could start to think about that. And you know, when we don't assign any value, it's zero, like I said before. So we're not really weighing the true costs and benefits. So we wanted to tweak this and kind of really dive into this issue a little bit more. So what we did was divide the coast up into these square kilometers and assign this relative ranking based on the average of 3 components: a physical component, a biotic component, and a human impact component. Each of those scores was out of 25 to 100 because we figured 25. We give them at least 25 because habitat's worth something, theoretically. Any habitat is better than no habitat. So for the physical component, that was an average actually of 4 different subcomponents of long-term erosion rates, the actual area of the beach that was there, the area of vegetated dunes, and the area of just dunes themselves. And then we came out with an average for that for each of those different squares. And then for our biotic component, we were able to develop this with some great snowy plover data that we had from Point Blue, which averaged bird richness, bird abundance, and nest counts. And then finally, the human impact component was the average of the actual development footprint within the tile, as well as the footprint of the existing shoreline armoring, or in the future scenarios, what new shoreline armoring was put down. And then we averaged those all together for each of the different reaches, but then we also calculated them for every management and adaptation scenario that we looked at, and looked at how that would change given that implementation over time, considering sea level rise. So it was a lot of data. We had a lot of data to work with. And then we turned all of this over to our economists, and I will not pretend to be one, but they did a really amazing analysis of the impact of these different management scenarios, again, given sea level rise, to recreational benefits, to land and property, and then to the environment as well. And they even did a real-time survey to try to get user data, so understanding better the willingness to pay and how people are using the beach in this area, because it's different from most of the standard research that's mostly in Southern California for that. Then we did a sensitivity analysis to test how robust our parameters were, and it essentially said that no matter what we fiddled with in terms of the key assumptions that we made, the main points, takeaways were still the same. And those are that non-armoring and nature-based solutions economically outperform shoreline armoring in all but one of the bajillion scenarios that we looked at. So that was exciting for us to find, and we knew that seawalls kill beaches, but we thought that this would actually have a much more significant impact on how we might manage the coast than we even thought going into this, even though we at TNC kind of had our fingers crossed that our theory was right, but it was dramatically better than we ever thought it would be. The other thing that we found was that beach nourishment may actually be okay as an option from an economic perspective, depending on availability, cost, ability to get sand there, through regulatory and policy issues. But we at TNC are kind of grappling with this one because we always think of beach nourishment as something that kills critters on the beach. So, something to think about. We're still kind of figuring out what to do with that. And then managed retreat is an economically smart strategy. And planning ahead is actually really important. So the benefits of non-armoring adaptation become increasingly clear as we start to see the more rapid increase in the rate of sea level rise, which is potentially as soon as 2050 or maybe sooner, given some of these ice melt scenarios that we're thinking about now. So just to reiterate, main takeaway is that in Southern Monterey Bay, it's possible to plan ahead, protect our communities, protect nature, but also it saves us money. So when we kind of think, so what now? Where do we go? What do we do with this knowledge? There's some things that need to happen between understanding this and then taking action, right? So what we have decided over the course of this project while we were developing relationships, we realized that some of our partners at the local level need blueprints. They need recommendations for what strategies to use and which would work in what areas. So TNC has a grant through the Fourth Climate Assessment to work with a team of partners, again, a big team, to look at where and how natural infrastructure can be deployed for coastal adaptation. So we're going to develop blueprints for how to do that and use the Monterey Bay area as a pilot site, so to take this information to the next level. And then just briefly some of my lessons learned. One thing was to be really realistic about timelines, budgets, and scope. So we were awarded $150,000 to do this, but TNC spent an additional $75,000 on top of that because as we fleshed out this complicated new methodology, we had a lot of spin-off contracts to answer new questions that arose that were, you know, really important in allowing us to move forward and answer that bigger question. And then, like I said, our methodology was new and innovative. So when we were all said and done, we submitted the report to the Coastal Conservancy, and they had questions about it, which we thought were legitimate. So we went back and actually revised our methodology and are just handing that revision back in now. So it took a little more time and resources and money to do that as well. So just something to think about when you're doing some of these out-of-the-box projects. The project team, like I said, was huge, and it allows us to push the boundaries of brain power. Also occasionally push the boundaries of my sanity in terms of contract management, because we had anywhere from 5 to 8 contracts, subcontracts going at a time, which was a lot to manage. So think about that when you're thinking about project management budgets. And then stakeholder engagement. So you can't just put yourself in the shoes of local planners anymore. That's not an acceptable way to do stakeholder engagement. You really need jurisdictions to buy in and own this kind of work in order for them to be able to use this, to weigh in and make sure that deliverables are really in the most useful format. That's tricky because there's timelines for updating these, LCPs and general plans, doesn't necessarily line up with this. So it was tricky for us because we didn't have relationships in this area when we first started that were as strong as some of our partners there. So we spent a huge amount of time building relationships and doing that stakeholder engagement above and beyond what we had anticipated. And just finally, like I was saying, our alignment is still a little off. So the timing of this doesn't necessarily line up. There are a lot of local partners that really wanted to engage, but there was staff transition, and there's only one person in Seaside doing this, and they don't have any funding to do it, or they've finished their plan already, and they don't have time to incorporate this until the next round of updates a couple years from now. So we have a lot of work left to do, but that's but definitely a lot of new information to share with folks and engage in that conversation more deeply in this area. So just want to say thank you to the Coastal Conservancy for the grant, to the project team for being a great team to work with and for really pushing the boundaries on this fun study, and then our partners in the Monterey Bay area that we now have a really robust stakeholder group there. So thanks, Hilary. I'll pass it back to you guys.
Great, thanks, Kelly. That was a great presentation. Next, we'll have Alyssa Mann from USDC Grant talking about USDC Grant's work in AdaptA. And again, if you have questions for the presenter, please type them into the questions box on your control panel. And here, Alyssa, I'm tossing it over to you.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yep, great.
Okay, great. Well, thanks so much to the Coastal Conservancy for putting on this webinar. Really great group to be a part of. So first I just want to acknowledge, anytime I talk, it's on behalf of the whole Sea Grant team, which includes Phyllis Griffman, and they're actually our newest staff member, Nick Sadrapour. I also want to acknowledge Juliet Hart, who was with us for a lot of this work, just moved over to USGS earlier this year, but she was really instrumental in a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about today. So first, for those of you that aren't that familiar with Sea Grant programs, we're a federally funded program from NOAA. There's 33 of us in all coastal and Great Lakes states, and we work on coastal and ocean issues with local communities in our area. We have had a pretty long history of looking at and funding climate science, but really only started working in earnest on climate adaptation with local communities in about 2009, 2010. Actually, pretty recently, we decided to do a big effort to look back at those 6 to 7 years and And as Juliet was leaving, we really wanted to do a retrospective and think about what the heck did we learn along the way through our different technical assistance programs and our kind of general outreach that we do on climate adaptation. So most of the lessons I'm going to talk about today come from our work in the Los Angeles region through our AdaptA, which is a coalition of 11 cities and the County of Los Angeles. But we've also learned a lot from working with partners on outreach throughout Southern California and even other parts of the state, especially through our Cosmos outreach program, which wraps up this winter. We started this work working with the City of Los Angeles on a sea level rise vulnerability assessment. Through that process, we realized pretty quickly that most solutions and most issues that we were looking at, particularly around our beaches, required a regional approach. And so thanks to both the Ocean Protection Council and the Coastal Conservancy, we were able to fund this regional AdaptA project. There's really two components. The OPC funded part was really the funding the science, but the Coastal Conservancy provided us with another pot of funding to provide technical assistance and outreach around some of the scientific modeling coming out, and also to build capacity within the coastal jurisdictions to use this information in their planning. Again, we figured out pretty early how critical taking a regional approach is for adaptation planning, particularly for sea level rise. Doing this, quote, the right way requires a lot of cooperation and collaboration. I think you've already heard from the two examples before me that you really need to think beyond just these kind of artificial jurisdictional lines that we've created for ourselves. But even in one specific locality, coordinating across levels of government and different organizations really has to happen. I think everywhere in California, everyone's trying to figure out how to really do regional planning, adaptation planning in practice. There really are no mandates or existing institutional mechanisms for adaptation to shepherd this, but it's something at Sea Grant we're really hoping to help happen in LA and in Southern California. So at USC Sea Grant, we consider ourselves a boundary organization. We work to provide the link between the science and policy fields, and strive to be kind of that neutral broker of good information. We focus a lot on convening the different communities of practice and provide opportunities to work together to move forward in adaptation. I think, and probably biased since it's coming from someone that works at a boundary organization, but having a kind of neutral convener play a role can be really helpful in a lot of these processes. Obviously, you heard from the Nature Conservancy, and there's a lot of other kind of regional collaboratives that are kind of playing this role. It's really a field that's expanded over the last 6 to 7 years. So the first lesson I want to talk about from the perspective of boundary organization is how useful it is to be a place-based boundary organization. We've now been working with our stakeholders in LA for a number of years, and having that continuity and long-term involvement has been a huge contributor to the successes that we've been able to achieve. We've been able to expand our stakeholder base, develop new kind of innovative partnerships that break some of those silos that have existed in the past. And we've also found that when we work in other parts of Southern California or other parts outside of Southern California for particular projects, we always look for those kind of place-based organizations to partner with because of the knowledge about local issues and those perspectives is really helpful for any sort of outreach that we do outside of Los Angeles. So the next lesson I want to talk about has to do with science translation, which is really one of Sea Grant's primary goals. We help communities identify and bring the best available science and make sure they have the information and details they need to move forward in their work. In the early years, we really focused on bringing the best scientists to present to stakeholders. I think we felt more pressure back then to prove climate change was really happening. So we had scientists from, say, the Nobel Prize winning IPCC come and give these very cutting edge and complex presentations about the state of the science. And what we heard from our stakeholders is that, they really learned a lot, but didn't quite know how to apply what they were hearing to their day-to-day job. And so more recently, we've taken a different approach. We've done a lot of outreach around as new sea level rise models have become available in Southern California. We've taken this approach that maybe less is more. Not everyone necessarily needs the same level of technical detail. You don't need to know everything under the hood of your car to be able to drive it, right? And I think someone else mentioned, maybe it was Hilary or Kelly, that you really have to tailor your message to the audience that you're working with. And so I think stakeholders appreciated that we valued their time and not keeping them in some of these workshops for really long science presentations, and that we really wanted to dive right into the issues that they care about. But certainly, some stakeholders will want that more detail and technical information, and we provide other opportunities for that. But maybe, but it doesn't necessarily need to be for everybody. So again, it's really important to communicate kind of key talking points rather than giving them everything. It's really difficult to calibrate the level of information. There is definitely such a thing as too much information. With climate science, being ever evolving, it can sometimes stall the progress if we overwhelm our stakeholders with kind of the wealth of information that's available. We worked really closely with our science presenters, our science communicators, and modelers to minimize kind of jargon-heavy presentations, and to really do a lot of pre-work, asking our stakeholders, what were their main questions, what are the issues that they need help both understanding internally and communicating up the chain and to their communities. And we also, while most of the funding was really focused on doing outreach on the models, we also provided a number of other topics, adaptation-related topics, based on whatever the need that the community expressed. Depending on where they were in that cycle of adaptation planning, maybe they wanted to learn more about different adaptation strategies or process, legal issues, and we provided opportunities for that. So like I said, we really tried to tailor our events based on what folks said they needed. This is a bit of a messy slide, but it shows how our outreach has shifted over time, incorporating new focus areas as community needs shifted. While we were still talking a lot about sea level rise models in science these days, we're also, as communities have moved forward in the adaptation planning process, we begin to, like I said, move to some of the later stages of adaptation planning. So that brings me to the adaptive management. You guys already heard this from some of the other presenters as well. This is something we really stress in all of our outreach. Information, the technical knowledge, models, they're constantly evolving and coming out at different stages. And communities need to understand that this is kind of the nature of adaptation planning, not just right now, but probably through the future, and to shape their programs around the idea that things will change and that their processes and solutions need to be flexible to accommodate this. Adaptive approaches has been something extensively discussed in the literature, but I think only now are we starting to see how communities are approaching this in practice. There's been a lot of questions about, how do I actually, I want to see examples of putting more flexible language in some of these plans, or how do I look at things like triggers to help reevaluate when we change things. And so I think only now are some of those kind of practical examples of adaptive management are we starting to see. And that really brings me to this slide. which is what we hear over and over again, communities want examples. You know, we did a survey in 2011 of coastal professionals. Hopefully a number of you on this call have been pinged to do that, both in 2011 and our 2016 update. But we were trying to get after, you know, where are they in planning? What are the barriers that they're facing? And you'll see, I'm giving you guys a sneak peek into the initial results of 2016. But, you know, what we're seeing is that people are spending a lot of time, you know, we're seeing movement through the wheel, right? People are moving from understanding to planning, but they're definitely spending a lot of their time in sort of the planning phase and not quite jumping yet into implementation. You know, we're seeing a few early innovators with motivated people that really want to be out in front and test things out. And then there are, of course, those other communities that are seeing impacts today and really have to jump into implementation right now. But but really, those really make up a minority of folks working on this. So I think from our end, we're really trying to think hard about what is needed to help communities get over that hump and really move into implementation. With resources so scarce, you know, what I hear of communities say over and over to us is, you know, they need those tried and tested examples before they can feel confident enough to invest in implementation. So I think a lot of webinars like this and other opportunities to share lessons and approaches is really, really critical. I'm just going to say a couple things about funding. You know, when we started in 2009, we had a pretty small pot of about $30,000 to fund both that statewide survey in 2011 and the sea level rise vulnerability assessment for LA City. Both of those efforts spurred a bunch of other investments from other sources. Results from the survey helped state agencies pull together some grant programs to help fund local programs like Climate Ready or the commission grants and stuff like that. The LA project, because we brought together a bunch of groups that hadn't been working too closely on this issue, you know, they were able to band together and go after bigger pots of funding. So, you know, my whole point with this is that strategically placed and strategically leveraged funding can have quite considerable impacts, even if they're pretty small. So don't underestimate the power of small investments at the right time. But when you think big picture, you know, while we've made significant progress across the state, I think we're only chipping away at a pretty big problem. You know, with 20 coastal counties and tons of local municipalities, without more statewide funding sources, progress in coastal climate adaptation will continue to be pretty limited. You know, even from our federal partners at NOAA, you know, they released their Coastal Resilience Grant Program that was last year. They had 132 applications for $5 million, and we're only able to fund 12 projects. So it just speaks to the need that's really out there, both here in California and across the nation. You know, all of the different funds provided by OPC, the Conservancy, and the Commission, I think it's about 80 coastal communities are working. And you saw that big picture of the state that that the Conservancy folks put up. It's about 80 of them. But, you know, again, it's primarily funded vulnerability assessments and planning. And there will be quite a bit of need when we really do jump into this implementation stage. So perhaps without some directives from the state and federal level, with corresponding funding, we'll probably continue to make kind of this incremental change instead of maybe that kind of more transformative change that we really need to be able to really address this problem. So this is just my quick recap of the lessons. Again, the regional approach being such a useful and critical way to approach this issue. Having place-based organizations help you work through the process. If you're lucky to have a different group in your region doing that, I'd encourage you guys to engage them. Again, with climate science being always changing, trying not to overwhelm folks with too much information all at once, and to really emphasize some of those key messages that can help them move forward. And to keep in mind adaptive approaches, because again, we're never going to have perfect information, and there's always going to be new and better information coming out, but it shouldn't stymie the process. And then any way that we can find new ways to share some of these tried and tested examples, I think will help communities move forward in adaptation planning. And last couple things of commentary, modest investments can be really helpful, but eventually we will need some significant and sustained funding to make a big bite out of this issue. And to figure out more ways to help empower communities to really move forward in implementation. I think that's what our focus will be going forward. So that's all I have. Here's our contact information if you have any questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alyssa. So everyone got a premature look at our key lessons learned from these case studies, but we just wanted to thank all the presenters for their great case studies and the work they've done along the coast, and we wanted to highlight these key case lessons learned that other people can use going forward. One is that these projects are taking more time and money than we think. Two, we need to be planning for the next steps from the beginning of the project. Three, we need to be adaptive and build in flexibility. Four, we need to avoid the data analysis paralysis problem of there's always more data you could need or want. And then lastly, partnerships and stakeholder engagement are really important to the projects, and they do require more time and money. Good relationships should be maintained, and you should be ready to deal with some pretty sensitive issues from the beginning of the project. So now that we've listened through the case studies, we'll redo that poll to see which ones best resonate with you from the work you've done so far. So I'll go ahead and open that up and give you about 20 seconds, and we can see how your answers have changed. Okay, look like people are mostly done. We go ahead and close the poll and show the results. So looks like more time and money. Most people resonate with most people, as well as how important partnerships and stakeholder engagement are. And we'll go back to this next poll we wanted to do about what step of the process is everyone on the line currently involved in, just to see where most of us are. So we'll go ahead and open that poll up so everyone can see. And give you about 20 seconds as well. Okay, great. It's looking like most people are at the first 5 stages of the vulnerability assessment, and then kind of we were expecting, then moving on to the next phases. That's great to see. So again, we just wanted to thank all our presenters for their time presenting today, and we have been getting questions in during the presentations, and we'll now I'll toss it over to Kelly to help facilitate that.
All right, hey everybody, thank you so much for typing your questions into the chat box. If you have more questions, please feel free to type them in. We have some time left, so hopefully we can get through most of these. So I'm just going to ask the questions verbally, and then I will I think some of them are for specific presenters, so I'll kind of flag which presenter this question is for, but feel free to jump in other presenters. So the first one I think was for Hilary Papendick. How are you managing data? Are you using Excel? Are you using a GIS system or an SQL-based database? So I'll turn it over to Hilary Papendick to see how she's managing this data.
Great, thanks, Kelly. Can you hear me?
Yeah, maybe speak up a tiny bit.
Okay. So the main way we've been managing data is through a GIS system. We worked with our GIS staff at the county to develop an open data portal where we are uploading all of our GIS data to an open data portal, which we then shared with the consultants. And it's, right now it's password protected, but because we're still working on finalizing metadata and making sure everything is up there. But then once it's complete, that'll be open and available as part of the county's data management open data system. So people can go in and download the data, you can map it. It's basically like an online GIS viewer and management system.
Great, thanks, Hilary. All right, next question. I'm going to throw it over. I think this is for Kelly Leo. The USGS erosion data is dated. Is there a current understanding of the erosion rate? And importantly, is there an understanding if the rate is static or increasing?
So that's a great question, and I am not the person to ask it of. But I do know that for our analysis, the previous analyses in that southern Monterey Bay area had a constant erosion rate and only looked at like erosion. We weren't thinking about sea level rise and how the erosion rate would change. So partial answer there is that we looked at how erosion would increase due to sea level rise at the site, and that was all done by ESA. So they would be the ones to ask something so detailed like that. I'm definitely not an expert, but hopefully that helps you a little.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Kelly. Let's see another question. I think this is for everyone, so let's just go in the order of presentations. Hilary, Kelly, and then Alyssa. How much does a cost-benefit analysis play into your assessment or plan? So let's start with Hilary, and then she can pass it off to Kelly and then Alyssa.
So we definitely plan on doing cost-benefit analyses for some key projects in areas where we know there's flooding and sea level rise risk. So that's part of our next phase. And we have received some funding from the Board of Supervisors for that piece. So our plan is to work with our Department of Public Works and identify some key areas where we can start looking at what are the costs and benefits of different adaptation strategies, and then also incorporating natural solutions into the cost and benefit. So it's in our plan, but we haven't started working on that yet.
Cool. This is Kelly. I think we're the Nature Conservancy, so we're thinking about protecting coastal habitat, but we direct the California Coastal Resilience Network, which is essentially a place where it's a lot like this webinar today, where we do learning exchanges and try to share lessons learned up and down the coast about coastal adaptation, obviously with the idea of protecting coastal habitat. And one of the things, a lot of our membership, even though it's a good spectrum of coastal managers in California, a lot of the membership was from local municipalities. Originally we were designing this network to be a place where state agencies could talk to local managers more readily, more freely, in a sort of neutral, casual or informal space, more frequently than at the average annual conference or something. But the reason I bring this up is because we surveyed our membership, which was largely local coastal managers, to try to figure out what was most important to them, and that is what came up to us. That is one of the reasons why we chose to focus on this economics work, and that was because essentially they say it comes down to bottom line, and to being able to persuade planning commissions to spend money on particular things. And some of the nature-based adaptation approaches are just kind of unknown. We haven't been doing a great job of documenting them, even though we have been using them probably more often than people are aware of in our history of coastal management. So finding that information and putting it in a format that's accessible to managers and giving them the, the ability to support their decision-making process in favor of using nature-based adaptation solutions is really important to us as the Nature Conservancy. So we had a hunch that the economics of it would work out in the favor of nature in particular circumstances, and that's why we kind of went through with this and wanted to see if our hunch was correct, and we were lucky.
Yeah, and this is Alyssa. This is an area that we've been really interested in. Most of the communities that we've been working with, as you saw from the survey results, aren't quite ready for, they're mostly in the vulnerability assessment stage or maybe a little bit further than that, so haven't jumped yet into wanting to look at the economics of potential adaptation strategies. But it's something that's been really on our mind, and like Kelly talked about in her presentation, is that this is a really evolving field because some of the preliminary work on this didn't incorporate things like ecosystem services and stuff like that really needs to be a piece of the pie. So we have been on the lookout for kind of innovative approaches to this question. We started working with some researchers actually from the Netherlands that are doing a sabbatical here in California to do some preliminary work, but I think it's something that we're hoping to do some more robust work in the future. So again, looking for those examples of who's done this well so far is really what we'll be after.
Great, thanks everybody. These are great questions and great answers. We have quite a few, so we still have until 11:30, so we'll do our best to work through most of those. The next question is a question specifically for Alyssa. It came through that somebody's looking for examples specifically in LA. And Alyssa, are you able to describe some successful results of your sea level rise vulnerability study?
Some successful results of vulnerability assessment. That sounds pretty broad. I'd love to hear a little bit more about what they're after in that question.
You want to just share? It was kind of a broad question. Maybe the person that asked that question could take more detail into the question box. We can come back to that one if that would be better.
Okay. I mean, for now, what I can do is point out that we are just wrapping up the science portion of the Regional AdaptA LA project, and we'll actually be having a webinar next week. Please contact me if you'd like to be included on that. To go through the results of both the shoreline change and coastal erosion models that were done for LA County, but also a preliminary vulnerability assessment, which was maybe a misnomer, which is really a look at county-wide, what's within those kind of exposure zones. So we're going to be having a first webinar on that next week and a bigger workshop on some of those results in January. So if you're not already on my list, please contact me and I'd be happy to include you.
Great. Well, we'll wait and see if there's any more detail, but thank you for that answer. The next question was kind of a question for everyone, so we'll see if maybe one person wants to volunteer to answer this next one. A question came through wondering how we're working with disadvantaged communities and communities of color. So anyone want to volunteer to answer that one?
I could start. Yeah, this has been an area that this is Alyssa again from USCC Grant. This is an area that we've been really interested in. When we did our sea level rise vulnerability assessment for the city of Los Angeles, we commissioned a study on social vulnerability with Dr. Susie Moser. And it ended up being really the most powerful of the pieces of that study. Got the most attention both in the media and from kind of the higher ups in the federal government. And what we found, I think a lot of the perspective is that when you're looking at coastal issues, you must be talking about rich people's homes only, right? But what we found is that particularly in Los Angeles, we have some really old and established neighborhoods that that are home to some of these more vulnerable communities. For us in LA, it's places like Wilmington and San Pedro, those communities that surround the Port of Los Angeles, and even Venice, which is a really different kind of community that has a mixture of both, expensive homes, but a large homeless population, a big proportion of people that rent their home instead of own it, and so you have some issues there as well. And so it's been something that we've been really interested in. I think the next step in that work is looking at not just, it's really interesting to see the results of, say, a social vulnerability assessment, but how do you make that information actionable, both from local government as well as for the community itself and community leaders, and how do you empower communities to be able to use that information to build resilience in those areas. So it's something that we've gone after some different grant opportunities for, and really hope to expand that work.
Great. Thank you so much. Anybody else want to jump in on disadvantaged communities and communities of color and how we're engaging them? Or if not, we can move on to another question.
I guess this is Hilary. I can just chime in quickly that we did a similar analysis on different community characteristics that could make populations within the county more vulnerable to flooding, and within that is ethnicity and language and a number of other different factors. So we have mapped throughout the county how those different characteristics overlay with sea level rise scenarios. So that will really help us prioritize as we work with the cities to think about how to increase resilience in those areas. But I think we're also still working on the best strategies to work with those communities. We have done some translation of our materials into Spanish, but this is an area that we're really interested in and continuing to work on.
Great, thanks, Hilary. We'll jump to the next question. This one was specifically directed towards Kelly, but I think I think it could be answered pretty broadly, unless this person was specifically maybe interested in Santa Cruz. The question is, did you find professional engineers or economists who had expertise in adaptation analysis, or did they have to develop this expertise? So I think that could be also asked more broadly, when looking for consultants. Are you looking for people who already have this expertise in vulnerability assessments and adaptation analysis, or is this something that you kind of work with your normal tried and true consultants and have these consultants develop this expertise?
So this is Kelly. It's a really good question because finding the right consultants is incredibly important. And we worked with ESA on this one, and they have a ton of great experience, or some of the most experience of any of the consulting firms that I'm aware of when thinking about nature-based adaptation, actually across the country. So we're not even supposed to even sound like we're promoting anybody, so I'm definitely not necessarily doing that, but they were wonderful consultants to work with. And yes, we still had to develop some of the methodology, even given that level of expertise. So we worked with economists who had started to think about this before, but we really kicked the can down the road in terms of tackling how to analyze how the shoreline changes if we implement these very different strategies. And we started thinking about creative strategies like rolling easements, and I don't think people have modeled things like this before. So yeah, it's an area where there's room to grow and learn in terms of methodology, but we were able to find the right people, I think, to do it.
I can also jump in here really quickly just for a couple comments. This is Alyssa. Like Kelly said, how critical it is to pick the right consultant based on what you want to do. And that really comes down to the part about how you scope your project and make, I think what we've been trying to encourage our stakeholders is to find that balance between the things that can be done in-house or that do lend themselves to needing a lot of participation from the jurisdiction itself, and the things that would be better for a consultant, and really scoping those out and what you really want to see at the end point. But yeah, I mean, different consulting firms have different things that they have historically done or might emphasize, different things. And so how important it is to do a really, in-depth look at what you want to achieve at the end and pick your consultant, really based on the particular project. So that would just be my advice.
Great, thank you. We just had a new one come in that I think might be a good one for the group. We've got about 15 minutes left. It kind of lends itself to why we're doing this webinar today, but someone asked, how much crosstalk has there been among these projects, maybe asking specifically among these 3 projects, and have some of the methods already been exchanged either between the 3 folks on the phone or with others, in your specific regions? So whoever wants to start, feel free to jump in.
I could start. This is
Oh.
No.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say that when we started our project, we were able to build off the AdaptA and some of the work that USC Sea Grant had done. So we really liked the approach where they took kind of these case studies, and we used that kind of the work they did on the social vulnerability study and then this case studies to help kind of form what we were doing. So it was helpful for us to be able to start after a number of projects had already started.
This is Kelly again. I think ours was a little bit unique in that, it doesn't necessarily match some of the others that were funded here. So we weren't necessarily coordinating amongst these projects, but we did, like I said in my presentation, coordinate by having, referencing the documents and the analyses that have been done in the area and working with some members of the project teams that had done that analysis to take it further, and worked with consultants that had done similar analyses up and down the coast, so or at least parts of this analysis before up and down the coast that we could combine into ours. And then we've been sharing this information through the California Coastal Resilience Network, so trying to get, again, to that broader audience so that people who are thinking about doing this can at least pick up our report or ask us questions or look at the tool and try to build upon things so that they don't have to spend the same amount of money we did in terms of tweaking the methodology and getting it right, or to where we thought was acceptable and had moved the needle enough to really get some robust answers to our questions there. So, we've been trying to coordinate and broadcast what we've learned.
Great, thanks guys. All right, now this is, I'm sure, a popular question. Somebody asked, we're hoping for more information on funding strategies for implementing adaptation strategies. How do we get the money? So does anyone on the phone, any of our 3 presenters, have you found any funding for implementing strategies? Do you have any ideas for funding strategies? Even if they're preliminary ideas, I think it might be helpful to share with the group. So I'll let you guys duke it out, whoever's ready to answer that question first on funding strategies.
This is Kelly. Hearing the crickets and feeling them myself, I'll just chime in for a second and say that as part of the network that and I don't mean to keep mentioning it over and over again, but it's one of the best ways that I gather information from folks up and down the coast, and I've been getting this question a lot. And I know that ARCA's been, the Association of Regional Climate Collaboratives, has been hosting, or the Local Government Commission, maybe linked with ARCA, has been hosting these regional adaptation conversations to talk about funding. Now, I haven't been to one, but maybe somebody else online can talk a little bit more about them. But this is something that is identified by every partner that we have, wondering where to get that funding, and we're still asking the same question. And we've been thinking about creative ways that we can get, attention at state level to try to dedicate more funding for this. So thinking about doing state of the state conferences on sea level rise to focus, sessions on how to do creative financing, thinking about impact investing for this, and we're all over the map trying to figure it out. But I don't have any gems of an answer for anybody today.
Yeah, I can give a little bit more information about that project. It's a 4th assessment project that's led by Dr. Susie Moser and then ICF International. and they've partnered with the Local Government Commission. And, they're really looking at both institutional as well as financial barriers to adaptation and trying to get information from local governments, from local practitioners about what are the needs, what are some of those creative solutions out there. So if there are more of those opportunities that pop up on your invite through an invitation, I encourage you to go to those and be on the lookout. I'm not sure, I can't remember the timeline of their project, but anytime we see any preliminary results, we'd be happy to send it out to folks. But I think it will be, because it's definitely a big question out there, is how are we going to fund this kind of work long term? And obviously the different grant programs are helpful and start to chip away at it, but without some of those bigger solutions, like I said in my presentation, I'm not sure if we can make some of that really kind of transformative change. So.
All right, thanks you guys. I shouldn't have put you on the hook as a funder, but here in the Bay Area we have, the Restoration Authority funds for Measure AA that will be coming up in July 2017. Those funds are mostly for wetland restoration, but they can also be associated with flood protection, and public access is associated with restoration projects. So if you have any natural adaptation strategies coming up in July 2017, the RFP will be out. So we have $25 million a year, and that is just the San Francisco Bay Area, 9 counties. And then, the Coastal Conservancy, we have ongoing rounds of Prop 1. Earlier this year, we had a South Coast focused round on urban greening and green infrastructure. We also have another Prop 1 urban greening round coming up just for the Bay Area. And also we've had, as Hilary Waleka here at the Conservancy mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, we've had 3 climate ready grant rounds. One of those was funded through an appropriation in our climate resilience account at the state level, and funds from that account went to us, the Coastal Commission, the OPC, so we can cross our fingers for further appropriations into that account. And we do plan on doing future climate ready grant rounds as funds are available, but do agree that there needs to be more funding available for folks. And we're also working on new partnerships like with FEMA to kind of help folks integrate adaptation planning and vulnerability assessments. And so we'll be sure to send out any additional funding that we come across as well. So I think we'll move on to the next question. And feel free to volunteer. Maybe we'll just have one person answer this one because we're getting down to about 8 minutes left here. So the question is, for different approaches, what have you learned working with California jurisdictions and the state of California, planners and stakeholders that are integrating climate change and adaptation into local and state hazard mitigation plans? So folks are looking for examples, I guess, of working, with local cities and stakeholders, and how we're kind of integrating climate change into things like hazard mitigation plans and implementing projects.
I can jump in here just for a quick second, and then someone can, if anyone else has any other thoughts on this. But you guys just mentioned actually the new partnership with FEMA, that we've also been involved with that work. FEMA is rolling out their new flood insurance rate maps for all of California in the next couple of years here, and at the same time they wanted to do a lot more effort in terms of building, hosting some of these conversations within the community on resilience more broadly. And so a collaboration between some of the state agencies, NOAA, and us at USCC grant with FEMA to help host those conversations and get at some of the questions that people are having. I think, we call it alignment, but it's really an effort to look at those opportunities across some of these planning efforts where, say, being able to leverage some of the funding or some of the efforts done in, say, a local coastal program versus a general plan versus a hazard mitigation plan, and what are those opportunities to not only not have to duplicate efforts, but to get the different kind of communities of practice that tend to lead those plans together. As probably many of you know, often hazard mitigation plans are done through the emergency manager, or maybe even a fire department, and getting them better connected with, say, the folks that are working on general plans and local coastal programs in planning departments. And because if you are able to tag different mitigation projects in a hazard mitigation plan, it could make other funding available to your area that wasn't before. So look for those as they're coming out. I know they're going to be doing one in San Mateo here soon, and we'll be jumping to other counties within the state in the next year or two. So maybe that helps a little bit answer that question.
That was a great answer. Thank you so much. All right, we've got 5 minutes left, so I thought if there was anything that either of the three presenters felt like they didn't get a chance to share, or if there was any burning questions you saw came through that we didn't answer verbally here on the call, I just wanted to give 2 minutes for the three presenters to kind of, maybe a minute each, if you have any kind of closing remarks or anything else you want to share with the group. And we can start with, we'll go in the order of the presentations too. We can start with Hilary, and then Kelly, and then Alyssa.
Sure. So this is Hilary. I noticed some questions that came in that asked about where to get maps for inundation areas in San Mateo County, or where to find some different documents on our project. Our website is seachangesmc.com, and that has links to the different maps we used, which we use the Our Coast Our Future maps, which are available for both the Bay and the coast side through Half Moon Bay, and then we worked with BCDC to develop additional maps for the AECOM for the Bay side, and those are linked on their website. So I wanted to make sure everyone knew about that resource, and then I'm happy to answer any additional questions or get on the phone with people if there are additional questions about the details of the vulnerability assessment and where we're headed next.
Great, thanks, Hilary. And yeah, not to put anybody on the spot, but just in case you have any closing remarks or burning questions like that, Kelly, if you have anything, feel free to go ahead.
Sure, thanks. I just wanted to kind of say that, this was a complicated project, and we learned a lot doing it. And I think if there are folks on the line who get to this stage or thinking about getting to this stage, I'd be happy to be a resource and connect you to any of the folks on the team who you might need to talk to, because it took a lot of time and money and resources and energy to figure out how to start to tackle this. And I think it's an important part in this process of trying to figure out what adaptation strategies will be best for our coastline. So I'm happy to be a resource for people, and I'll definitely make sure that I ping this group when we have our tool ready, so that you're able to visualize the outputs of this, and also when that blueprint is ready, so when we take it to the next step, we'll be sure to continue to share, because I think we all stand to learn a lot from each other. So thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks so much, Kelly. It was great having you guys. Alyssa, do you have any closing remarks before we wrap up?
Yeah, just thank you guys for hosting this. I think this is a really great way to kind of get the message out about the different projects that are going on through the state. And I did just send my contact information. I know there was one question because I probably clicked out of that screen pretty quickly. So please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you so much.
All right, thanks everyone. I really appreciate your time with this webinar today. And especially I just wanted to thank Hilary, Kelly, and Alyssa for your presentations and your time with this. I think I speak on behalf of the attendees in saying it was really valuable to hear about your experiences with your projects and all of your lessons learned, and I'm sure we have no shortage of lessons learned, and I'm sure that's not going to change for a long while. But I do think it's really important that we're organizing these webinars and other mediums at conferences and meetings, and even informally from time to time, to kind of share what we're learning along the way, so that we can all continue to increase and better our planning for these vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans. So we will, here at the Conservancy, follow up with Alyssa, Kelly, and Hilary's contact information, as well as the recording from the webinar. And if you have any specific questions, if there's anything you missed, Hilary Woleka's email is on the screen. Feel free to contact her. and we will be signing off. And so thank you again for participating, and we look forward to future webinars and information sharing opportunities. Thanks, everybody.